Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. Today, I have with me Craig Tomczyk, who is a master technician at First Vehicle Services. Craig is an automotive and diesel technician with 15 years of experience. He holds an ASE Master Automotive certification, L1 and L2 certifications, as well as various heavy truck certifications. Craig specializes in and enjoys repairing electrical issues as well as gas and diesel engine diagnostics. Today, we're going to dive in and talk about diagnostics and general repair, and it should be a lot of fun. So, it is absolutely a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Craig. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here.
Great, great. So, this conversation kind of got started based on some posts that you had made on our shop talk section in WrenchWay. And what I love about the way you post is how thoughtful you are and how you lay things out. And we'll talk about some of those posts and really maybe dive into a little bit more detail on them. So I'm excited to get into that. But first, I want to meet Craig. I want to know more about Craig. So tell us, how did you get into this business?
Well, it started from a pretty early age. I was heavily influenced by the tuner culture of the early 2000s, like I think a lot of people my age were. Um,
Thanks, Fast and Furious.
yeah, pretty much. It
Yeah.
you know, for me, I always liked cars. Cars were always unattainable. In my mind as a child, a Dodge Viper was the king of cars. That was a $80,000 car back then, which is nothing today.
Right.
And then those movies and just it kind of opened up a world of you can have these cool kinds of things if you can do it yourself. Um,
Yep.
Also, at that same time, I was heavily into dirt bikes and ATVs. Still am to this day. And I basically, to be able to ride my own stuff, I had to fix it if I broke it. No one was going to do it for me, and I didn't have the money to take it to, as a kid, to take it to some shop to have it done. So it was figure it out, and luckily, my dad has a Craftsman toolbox in the garage, so I started digging into it, and that started from there. I knew pretty early on in my preteens I was probably going to be doing this for a living, and it
No kidding.
and sure enough, here I am, 20 years later from that point, and doing it for a living.
How did you have a family background in repairing things, or was it just a coincidence that your dad had that Craftsman toolbox in the garage?
So, the most of my family is we do. It is largely trade orientated, but it's not automotive. I'm the black sheep, if anyone's a black sheep in the family. No, I'm serious. A lot of welders, fabricators, HVAC. My father was HVAC. So if anyone is a black sheep, it's me. But I ran with it, and here I am.
That's awesome. So, what was your first step into becoming a technician? Then was it going to trade school? Was it maybe an apprenticeship in high school? Like, walk me through how it became more than just a hobby.
It was definitely getting into my high school's automotive program. I went to a technical high school. You had to apply for. So even as early as middle school, I started really buckling down to try to get good grades because it was not very easy to get into the school. Um, so it started there. As soon as I got there, I put forth all the effort to make sure I got into the program. Our freshman year, we sampled 6 different programs, and automotive for me was second, and I was sweating. I remember that to this day. There's already a bunch of kids in there. I'm not going to get in, but luckily enough, I did. And from there, it's I went through the rest of high school. I did Skills USA competition for my state. I won that one. I also
Wow.
did Ford AAA. I don't know if it's called Ford AAA or if it's around anymore. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. I think it was called VICA at one point. I might,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
so okay, so yeah, you're familiar with it. So I did that with a partner. We did well on that as well. And actually, I graduated with like $70,000 with scholarship money.
Wow.
Yeah, it was between all the
That's
schools.
incredible.
Yeah, it wasn't just one; it was all of them. But it was when I look back on it, I have a certificate somewhere. There's thousands of dollars sitting on the floor. you know, um,
That's incredible though. Like, cause that's not something I think to the general public, we don't equate that to a technician, right? That there's a some level of educational success that led to these scholarships, and I think that's where there's such an opportunity to tell these stories of folks like you, right? That are absolutely killing it and have done such a good job and done it the right way. That is not maybe it's almost like that paradigm shift is needed in the general industry, right? Like it's showing that Craig's a pretty damn smart person, and this is a pretty cool thing that he's doing. So that is incredible,
and
really really cool.
and not only that, but you can keep in mind that at this point, that was pushing 15 years ago. That was 2009.
Yeah,
So,
so now that dollar valuation's like $1.5 million now. No.
yeah, I'm sure it's definitely going up.
Yeah. So you go through that, you get the scholarships. What happens next?
From there, I went to work. I had the feeling that the best opportunity was going to be getting my foot in the door somewhere, and I don't think that is the same way to go today. I think with as advanced as these cars are getting, even back then it was changing like crazy. But today more than ever, I do believe in post secondary training, for the safety factor alone of where we're heading. I think it's essential. But it was a little bit, for me, it was just a little bit less traditional back then. It was, we were in the middle of the financial crisis. I remember not wanting to take on the debt, which may have been a good idea at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got my foot into doors. I was willing to sweep floors and do nasty stuff if I was able to learn and be under someone to figure out how they do the job and just to soak in all the knowledge I have so that I could be essentially where I am today.
I love that. And what was your first job? Like, what was you didn't automatically come on and become a great technician, I assume. You mentioned sweeping the floors. What was your first job as you came into the real world?
First job was at a local tire shop, um, which if I'm not mistaken, I wasn't supposed to be allowed to technically work at because of my age, but I think it got pushed under the rug and they got me in. I did a lot of tires. I started off. I was making $7.50 an hour for what it's worth. So if you're listening to this as a young technician, I'm sure it's a lot higher today.
Just a little
um,
bit.
yeah, lots of tires, oil changes, and one thing they did make a lot of money with was alignments. So that's where I started to like alignments, and I still enjoy doing alignments to this day. If there was something to learn, it was right up my alley. So I got good at that. From there, I moved on to multiple Chevy dealerships, um, working on as a technician there. I learned a lot about the GM products. I did spend some time as a service advisor as well, which was an interesting experience. And
I bet.
it broadened my aspects of what it takes to actually do that job. It's not as easy as it looks. I can say that as a tech. Good service advisors are worth just as much as good technicians. Um,
100%. I do you so let me ask you this. Would you recommend a technician at least try their hand at it, or maybe even just shadow a service advisor? It sounds kind of untraditional because we're so focused on getting hours produced that maybe we don't see that opportunity out there. But I think there's so much power in putting yourself in the other person's shoes, right? And I know there's a lot of technicians out there that get frustrated with their service advisors and vice versa. I think there's so much impact in what you did there because it opens your eyes to see the difficulties that the other side sees. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'm assuming that was probably pretty impactful on your career.
oh, massively. There's this the stress is definitely there for them. And yeah, to your point, if you have a chance to shadow under a service advisor, absolutely 100% do it. It is not easy working with the general public who is at your department because they have to spend money and not up front at sales because they want to, looking for their next car. it's a challenge. It takes a very a people person to do the job. I don't. It's definitely not something every technician can do. There's always kind of that joke that, you know, writers and managers can't come down into the shop and be a technician, but we can go up and do their job. And to a point, as far as maybe the tool aspect, that's definitely true because, you know, as technicians, we have thousands of dollars worth of tools, but it is not easy. It is not something
No,
you're going to walk into.
no. And if you're one of those techs that happens to be struggling with your service advisor out there right now, and I know there's probably a lot that are listening to this that are, I would encourage you, maybe it's coming in on a Saturday that you aren't scheduled to work, or, your day off. And it sounds like the last thing you'd want to do, but it might help you significantly down the road in terms of understanding what it is that they go through, and maybe even being able to offer suggestions on how you can better work together once you see their side of things. I think if that's something that you're really struggling with, and you can't get an understanding between the two of you, uh, go have a conversation, go put yourself in their shoes a little bit, because I do think there's a high level of impact in doing that. So great suggestion there. I'm glad you did that. I'm glad. I think there's so many people that would benefit from going through that like you did. But man, it's cool that you are humble enough to be able to just say, hey, yeah, I did it, and it wasn't as much fun as I thought it might be.
Yeah, and think of the opportunity to really create a working relationship with that service advisor. I mean, if he sees that you're actually willing to do that to gain an aspect of what he does, that's got to mean something.
Yes. Yes. And just getting that respect, from that person, it you feel like that should be a hand in hand type of thing. I don't think it happens as much as we all think it does, but getting that respect level, making sure that you both respect each other is a pretty important relationship for both to have. So that's really cool. So you went through life as a technician, and then when did you transition out of the dealership world?
Oh, that was 2016 that started when I started with the fleet end. And that has been a great transition as well. There's a huge advantage to working fleet between variety of what you're working on. Most of it is hourly in most cases, or some maybe even some type of salary and commission. I haven't come across one of those yet, but I do believe they structure it out for productivity in a lot of places as well, which is fine. Um, it's been a great experience as well.
That's great. And that leads us to today, which is the podcast that we're recording. Uh, we wanted to talk about some of the posts that you've made on Shop Talk a little bit more in depth, primarily the one where you talked about the theory of operation, and really had a nice write up on it, and some advice to entry level technicians. And I thought it was pretty awesome of you to go out of your way to post that, right? To go out and at some level provide some advice and some guidance for that younger technician that's out there. First and foremost, what made you want to post? You've been an active participant on Shop Talk, and doing it in a way that I think presents you as being a very intelligent person, and a caring person that really wants to drive this industry forward. So what possessed you to want to go kind of start that conversation?
It's a combination of a few things. Number one, being because I did not go the traditional route of post-secondary school and college for this industry. I learned to rely and lean on things like theory of operation to really understand what it is you're working with and how it operates. Because you have to know how something works to fix it. And I see this a lot um, with any technician in general, not even just new technicians, but somebody who dives into something and they're really just not entirely sure what they're working with. Um, so it starts with a little bit of with a diagnostic process, but that's, different conversation. But understanding is so important. So if I can encourage someone to say, okay, maybe next time I have this check engine light on this car, truck, whatever it is, and I don't understand it. Maybe I can go and look up that error code, and maybe it'll even, transition me to the system I'm working with, and I'll give it a chance to see if it helps me.
So that is one thing, and Craig and I talked about this in our intro call to the podcast, but I remember myself as a young technician, this is what I failed at horribly, which is the theory of operation. And I think a lot of young techs, when they go through school, kind of go through a similar path that I did, in that you kind of roll your eyes at the theory of operation and just say, hey, I just want to I want to start diagnosing things, and I want to get to use the fancy tools and do the cool things. But what I missed, along with I think a lot of people, is that unless you know how things work, and I guarantee there were instructors that are screaming that at us, right? They're telling us, you need to know how to work, how this stuff works in order to fix it. But it never really clicked with me. And I think that's where very successful technicians have a different mindset, in that they want to know how things work. They want to know how they function, how they're supposed to get uh, the communication that the part is supposed to move in a certain way, right? And I think going through some of those classes when I was going through tech school, my eyes would almost gloss over a little bit, right? Where you're learning how an electromagnetic field works, and you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to need to, I kind of know about that. But to truly dive in and get an understanding of something takes work. And I think as a young person, I didn't understand that. Whereas you, going from a different background, I think really understand that to this day, that in order to fix something, you just simply have to know how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And even to go back to the first thing you mentioned, missing it. Well, and even right there is, did you miss it, or were you not shown correctly? What is there something that was missed that would make you realize what someone was talking about? I'll go, oh, and I just had a click. I understand it now. This is why it's so crucial. So when you go through tech school and you talk about internal combustion engines and everything revolving around them, and then you go and you actually work on one specifically, maybe the small block Chevy engine on the stand is a lot different than the General Motors 3.6 liter V6 that you're actually working on in the bay, that has all kinds of cylinder deactivation and variable valve timing. So that's where I think the theory of operation comes in more specific. It's giving you the specifics on what you're working with, building on the foundation that you got when you were in tech school.
You do bring up an interesting point there. And that was one thing, again, I hate to talk about myself in any of these podcasts, but one of those things that did happen later on in my career was I was a factory rep for an OE, and I sat through this class, and the instructor was talking about electricity, and it was like an electrical 2 course. And the way that he explained it clicked with me so fast that it was like, okay, I had all these bits and pieces of information in my brain. And then when he explained it, it was like all of that stuff came together. Right. And it was weird to me that, that's no fault of my tech school teachers. And maybe it was just the level of maturity at that point, but the way that he said it and explained it, and this is, probably 7-8 years after tech school, it clicked. And when it clicked, it was like, all right, that I don't know why that didn't click before, but I heard it a different way. And all of a sudden now it's like, now I get it.
Exactly. I think we all have one of those moments in our careers with what we do that really makes things just set in place. And I think it's if you can find it and then experience it, it's great.
Technicians, have you checked out WrenchWay yet? WrenchWay is a free online community for automotive and diesel professionals. Whether you're looking for a job or not, WrenchWay makes it easy to explore new opportunities, stay up to date on what's going on with the auto diesel community in your area, and help improve and promote the technician profession. Check out all the job details you care about before you apply or interview with WrenchWay Top Shops. Open to new job opportunities but don't want to apply yet? Create an anonymous reverse job post and let shops reach out to you. See what's going on in the industry and in your area through WrenchWay Shop Talk. Join the WrenchWay online community for free by visiting wrenchway.com or by downloading the WrenchWay mobile app. Links are in the show notes.
How do you, when you started off and you're thinking about theory of operation and trying to get a good understanding of how things work, how did you find the time to be able to allocate to figuring out how things work? Is this after hours studying? Is it on the clock? Is it, because you're going to deal with a different type of repair all the time. So how do you really hone in on that one thing and say, okay, I need to learn how this works and I need to learn the theory of this? How did you pick and choose what to learn, and then how did you go about learning it?
Well, I would say it was a little bit of both. I definitely I've spent a lot of time in my own time in the past on training, and definitely while working as well. A lot of it comes from necessity. If we're stuck on something and we can't figure something out, and we spend a lot of time with it, what do you want to do? We don't want to throw parts at anything. Although sometimes in some cases, manufacturers today will have you throw apart something. But we don't want to do that. So can we go back to the drawing board, take a breather, and try to read through things, and then try to make another plan of attack to try to figure something out?
Do you find yourself doing that? And this is something I'm fascinated with good technicians is, if you're in the middle of a project, right, or you're trying to diagnose something and it's got you wrecked, it's got your brain in shambles, and the critical thinking component of your brain just isn't working like you'd want it to, are you able to kind of pull yourself away, go work on something else, and then go back, or are you one that has to stick with the problem until it's fixed?
I can go either way. For me, I have a diagnostic process, and I think you'll find a lot of technicians have this as well. I used it today. Another technician in the shop, he had a Ford 6.7 diesel truck he was working with, had a strange check engine light. Didn't quite understand the code. It's something newer for him. And for me, immediately, as part of my diagnostic process, I go, okay, let's analyze the situation. The check engine light is on. We have an error code. So what I did from there, and this is what I do on everything I touch, if that has a problem, like especially error codes, whether it be a check engine light, airbag light, etc. We wouldn't write to Ford because we have a subscription to Ford's software, and I typed in the error code, and we immediately got a service bulletin. So it took all of about 5 minutes for us to verify there's a problem. We verified the complaint, and we have a first step. So for me, and I think most technicians would agree with this, if you have a service bulletin on anything, especially an error code, that's step one. That variable has to be removed from the equation. And you may still have a problem after that, and that's fine. But first and foremost, you have to start with the very first steps.
So as we walk through this diagnostic process, and I want to stick on this a little bit because I do think this is so important for technicians to understand, your process starts with verifying the problem, which seems like a simple step, but if you have an intermittent rattle somewhere or something like that, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But once you verify the complaint, then you're checking bulletins from there, right?
Absolutely.
And checking, and kind of for anything you can there. What's the next step then? You found that there was a bulletin on this one, but say there's no bulletins. What's kind of your next step?
Well, from then really need to take the time to read through the error code if you don't understand it. Some of them are simpler than others. A PO 128 DTC, for example, that's pretty cut and dry in this industry as a failed thermostat. 99% of the time, that's what it's going to be. Every time, no, but most of the time it will be. O2 sensor error codes for heaters, that's pretty cut and dry as well for the most part. It all kind of depends on the level of complication of the system. And that's where you may need to go out and you need to read through theory of operation of the system, and and understand it more from there. And then there is even the manufacturer's diagnostic tree. It's usually not time efficient or ideal. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you can take your past experience and adapt it to figure out what you need, the solution for the issue. But it kind of has a few different ways it can go.
How hard is it now that you've been in the industry for many years to not assume things, right?
Oh
Like
my gosh.
I think in a diagnostic process, you're like, oh, I've seen this a million times. It's this one thing. And then you do that one thing and you're like, nope.
If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it is definitely not a duck.
Is there some level of training your brain to not automatically assume something, or is that where process really helps you to make sure that you're checking off all the steps along the way?
I'm very afraid to assume things because if coming up through this industry, when you make mistakes like that, it is not good for all parties involved. It's not good for you. It's not good for the service advisor. It's not good for the match. It's not good for business in general. So it's and there's a saying for it: when you assume, you can figure out in your head, but it's very important not to do so.
Yeah, I think that gets tougher in just general life. In how you approach a situation, as you rely so much on your experience that at times maybe it'll make you skip steps. But I
Yes.
think that's the importance of a process and training your brain to go through a process the correct way and doing all the steps, not shortcutting them, which can be very difficult if you've got a job that you've got to get out the door right away. You've got maybe a customer sitting there, or you've got somebody that's relying on you to get that done as fast as humanly possible. And yet you still have to kind of take a breath, go through the proper steps, do the right things, because if you don't, that could be a far more expensive ordeal for that customer. That could be more frustration for that customer because maybe you diagnose it one way and that's not actually fixing the problem. I give you a lot of credit for working that process because it is not an easy thing to do. And I think most techs would probably agree with that.
Yeah, and most of it comes from necessity, especially for I don't want to get yelled at. I want to do the job right the first time. It could be
Right.
as simple as that. I want to do the job right. I want to do it safely. I want to do it properly, and I want to make a paycheck.
So how do you, when you look at theory of operation, now you're trying to get your hands around how it works, right? You've gone through your process and you need to know how something works. What resources are you using to be able to understand that theory of operation?
Oh, that's the beautiful part. I have a lot of OEM sources to rely on, especially for the big three: Chrysler, GM, Ford, as well as I have a lot of heavy truck service information subscriptions as well. OE, Freightliner, International. So I have a big step up on a lot of non-traditional, non-dealers. Pro
Right.
Demand is a great resource. I loved Identifix. I don't have a subscription to it anymore. A lot of people don't like it, but Identifix is a tool like everything else. You can use it correctly or you can use it, incorrectly. But it's a remarkable information source. So I have, all kinds of great pieces to rely on.
I think when I was an entry level tech, that was one of the things that overwhelmed me, were the amount of places that you could get information. And I think everybody falls into their favorites, right? There's some that maybe they just feel more comfortable using to get to the information they need. But when you're first starting out, and especially if you're not in a dealership, I think dealerships are probably a little bit easier because you have all of the OE things at your disposal and you're typically working on one brand. But for those techs that are in independent shops or in fleets that might not have all of the access, it can be a little overwhelming because there's a bunch of different ways to get information. And, there's you kind of have to piece it together a little bit as to, hey, I use this program to get this type of information. I use this program to get this type of information. And I think they all have their strengths and weaknesses. But being able to find that takes some experience. It takes you going through it and trying to find that information, because once you do it, then it's not so bad. Then you kind of figure out where you're going. But until you get to that point, I remember it being overwhelming and trying to figure out where to go.
Absolutely. You need more than one source of information, that's for sure. And scan tools are another just like that as well. A lot of people ask me, well, what do you think is the best scan tool? My answer is all of them. And I didn't come up with that statement. That's what I've heard from other people, and that's from my experience. I want Ford IVS for my Ford products, and as well as FDRS. That's the newest, latest, and greatest. There's a Snap-on scan tool I'm going to want for things. It's maybe an Autel for the European cars. I don't work on a whole lot of that, but I know that's a very common tool for those, aftermarket wise. There's no one tool for the job, that's for sure.
When do you do any scope work? Do you work with a scope at all?
I do. I do have a Pico, the 4425. It's not the latest and greatest anymore. It was at the time. I do enjoy using it. I did find for my environment, it's not always as necessary. Sometimes I see a lot of the same problems, which is fine. Pico, use of scopes you'll find is usually at your high-end independent repair facilities. I do know how to use it. I like it. It's time consuming to set up. I would like to get even better with it. I think I'm a pretty decent scope user, but it's just not always needed all the time. A lot of the things I see, I already know what's wrong with it. And that has its downfalls too, because you're not seeing constantly new stuff all the time, different vehicles, but it works. It gets the job done.
When do you pull the trigger on when do you pull the trigger on using a scope? I'm always fascinated as to when in the diagnostic process that techs decide that, all right, I got to get out the scope. I got to try and figure this thing out.
Honestly, for me, if it's something that I want to graph current on, I think that's probably my most frequently used reason to pull it out. I have the current probe on it. I want to see current spikes, things of that nature. The battery, the Pico scopes have a battery test feature that are phenomenal. It's the best battery tester out there. You can't beat it.
Let's talk about schematics. How often are you using schematics? Are you at the point in your career, I'm sure you are, where you're comfortable with schematics and reading them and understanding the way that a circuit works and the importance of, we talk about theory of operation. I think that falls right in that bucket, right? Of being able to read a schematic and follow it along and see how a circuit works.
Absolutely. A lot of circuits today are computer controlled, whether it be power or ground. And injectors are a good example. Most of your fuel injectors on your engines, battery voltage is hot at all times to those, and your ECM driver grounds the injector to turn it on. Where you may have something different on a vehicle, like a vent valve on a Chevy truck comes to my head just because I probably put 100,000 of those in, where the PCM commands voltage to it to turn it on and off. If you don't know when things are supposed to be on and off, or if you're not using your scan tool to activate that circuit, you could steer yourself in the wrong direction real quick.
Yeah. You can dig a hole really fast with diagnostic time. But so when you look at a schematic, it's changed a lot over the years to where, I was always a big fan of, having a printed out schematic, especially if it was a bigger schematic, to be able to kind of still very elementary draw the line of where you're going and what powers what. And for me, it helped with, excuse me, the visual side of things. Are you primarily doing it using your computer now, just kind of, pushing a schematic along to wherever you need it?
I'm a printer too. I like to print it all out. Earlier this week, I had a Silverado I was looking at something engine related on, and it's 7 pages worth of diagrams. Most of your engine diagrams for GM products that, I know from experience. I don't know about, some of the other manufacturers, but it's all in one, and there were 7 pages of it. I print it all out and I sit it on my toolbox and I make my markings all across them to trace and follow things. And it's just easier for me. I know some people can sit on a computer or they bring their tablet or whatever they have next to their car. It's hard, so much harder for me to do that personally.
Same. Yeah. I haven't looked at a schematic in a while, but I imagine if I go back and use one, that I'm definitely printing it off. And if nothing else, it's, some of those pages, and I don't know if the schematics are still this way, where they break off of one page and then it would connect to a different page that you'd have to track down the that diagram and try to piece together the circuit through multiple pages. But for me, it was darn near impossible to do on a computer screen.
Yeah, that example I just gave you, that Silverado, the driver and the circuit starts on the module on diagram 1 and it ends on page 7, last page. You got to go across all of them, and the numbers and the wire numbers change on each page too. So you got to be careful. You have to make sure you pay attention to the colors, to make sure you don't lose your place and lead yourself astray.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Wrench. We'd like to take a minute to talk about this week's sponsor, Jasper Engines and Transmissions. Okay, your customer's engine or transmission has failed, but now is not the time for them to trade in their vehicle, not without a working engine or transmission. Besides, would they have kept their vehicle another 3 to 5 years if their engine or transmission had not let them down? If you answered yes, then Jasper Engines and Transmissions is your choice to give your customer vehicles new life and many thousands of miles of enjoyable driving performance. When considering the high cost of a new or newer used vehicle, there's a pretty good case to be made for replacing a drivetrain component that has failed or is delivering poor performance. Rather than trading in their car, truck, van, or SUV, install a quality remanufactured Jasper product for less than your customer would have to invest in a new vehicle or a newer used vehicle. Check out their website at jasperengines.com to learn more about the money-saving value of Jasper.
I want to ask for a piece of advice as it relates to schematics and taking the visual of a schematic and then implementing it in the vehicle itself. Any tips for finding connection points? And I as I think back again to my time in a shop, having to track down, some type of connection was sometimes really it sucked.
Yeah.
Like having to take apart wire looms or whatever was painful at times.
I think probably the best piece of advice I could give is be patient. It seems like such a simple task to just say, okay, connector C142, and it's supposed to be here. Oh, I don't see it. You got to relax and stop and say, okay, it doesn't look like it's there. And a lot of these things are drawn out. It looks like somebody took a magic marker and drawed the portion of the car where this thing sits, and it's very hard to differentiate sometimes. And usually when you make sure you take a break and take a breather and you go back to it, you'll find what you're looking for.
What about those intermittent issues? As we talk about theory and we talk about diagnostics, I think one of the bigger frustrations for a lot of really good techs are that scenario when you can't verify a complaint, or that you're trying to recreate what the customer is talking about, but you can't. What about those times? How do you go about that? Is it getting the customer and getting them to drive the vehicle for you and trying to get them to recreate it? Or are you just spending time trying to, do some different things to get it to act up? Like, give me an idea there, because that is a very, very frustrating thing.
Yeah, so it can start from a few places. It depends on severity level, or like how infrequent or frequent it happens. Sometimes you get DTCs with these problems, especially engine related. If you got a DTC, go to your freeze data and analyze your freeze data. Is there a certain engine temperature that it happened? All these, engine RPM, all those little things, something might stand out to you. And so then you can say, okay, the engine stumbles at 1100 RPM. Well, say the customer or the operator or whatever it is says the engine stumbles as they increase the RPM. Okay, well, it looks like it happens at around 1150. So try to focus your efforts there, because if it's going to occur there, it's not going to occur at 3000 RPM while you're driving down the road. That and being clear on the issue, that's a big thing too. Everybody needs to be on the same page when an intermittent issue is in the shop. And it also goes back to the patients again. The customer has to understand that just because it happened for them don't mean it's going to happen for you, especially not immediately. Usually, it's the joke. I took my car into the shop, and of course, it doesn't do it for them, but it does it for me as soon as I pick it up. That's real. It happens.
It is.
And then we kind of touched on service bulletins. You should go through, scan that VIN, look for service bulletins on that issue. You may find something there, and it may even very well be, okay, I've seen this problem before, and it was what a spark plug, and it's just a generic guess. And you can maybe even come to, I've done this in the past, you could come to the conclusion with the customer, it's most likely this, as long as everyone understands that, we could go ahead and make this repair. This is the 99% of the time, this is what's going to fix it. Are you comfortable with going this route, being that maybe we have not been able to duplicate it at all? And if they're not comfortable with that, that's fine. But 90% of the time you're going to do that, and it may work. So.
Yeah. We talked earlier about the relationship between the writer and the technician. In those scenarios where it is a little bit more intermittent, talk about an important relationship, right? Because you're trying to get that communication, and as a technician, oftentimes you're getting it third-handed, right? You're not getting it directly from the horse's mouth. You're reading a description on what's wrong with something.
Exactly.
And if that's not very well written up, that can create so many problems on the back end, and again, leading to that frustration in that relationship. I think it's important to even be able to sit down with that advisor, that writer, and talk about how you communicate, right? How are we talking? How, what are things that you need to look for in my notes, and how can I do a better job as a writer clarifying what the customer's concern was, right? Because I think the better we are with that, the less gray area there is for a technician to have to go down some path they shouldn't be down in the first place.
Yeah, and that's a major killer of the process of trying to solve the problem the first time. And it's not even always the service writer's fault as well. Whether he likes it or not, he's a middleman, and he or she can only do their best,
Yeah. And I think when we look at service advisor training, and for those shops that are listening out there, I think it's such an important piece to have your writers trained properly in how to write up a repair order, and doing it in a way that they're asking good questions to the customer, and that it's, we talk about a diagnostic process that you've got. Writers should have a same process, right? They should have a process that they're going through and making sure that they're asking the correct questions. And if they don't fully understand the answer from a customer, being able to be confident enough to go back and ask a follow-up question and really try to get to the core of the problem, because at the end of the day, that's going to help that advisor keep that customer happy. That's going to help that technician stay happy. That's going to help everybody and probably save time along the way. But it's also easier said than done when you're trying to write up an RO and you got another customer coming in, you're trying to rush to get that out. And you saw that from both ends, right? You saw that from the service advisor's chair. Talk to me a little bit about that, because it can be a challenge to properly write up a good RO.
Yeah, absolutely. And in many cases, many repair facilities, I know it's ideal in most cases for, like, if a customer comes in and they're complaining about a squeak and rattle, the advisor is supposed to go with them and say, okay, can you show me this, please? Can we take a quick road test so you can point it out so that way I heard it as well, so I can relay that information to my technician, whether it be where I think it's coming from or whether it did or did not happen. So that's something that's very helpful that I know some service supervisors are required to do. Not every place. But yeah, when you have when you're checking that customer in at 7:30 in the morning and there's 15 cars behind them, it's kind of tough to do that.
It is. I give our advisors out there a lot of credit for that, because that is a challenge. You've got people pulling at you from all ends, and you're doing your best to keep your head above water. One thing that I'll say that I think I see in the best service advisors is that they're the first ones to work. That they're oftentimes they're far before any of the technicians get there, or the customers, and they're prepared for their day. They have things laid out, and the ones that maybe aren't as successful are rushing in at the last minute, kind of throwing everything together. And I think the same could be said for techs too, right? Like if you have a tech that's rushing in at the last minute, kind of disheveled, and don't have their toolbox organized, and their place where they're working, their stall organized, it probably speaks volumes about the quality of work that they're going to put out that day.
Yeah, and for me, it seems like it's kind of a gray area, because you'll have a technician that is a total slob, and their work immediately reflects it. And you may have a technician who's very clean, particular, and he may be a very good technician. Maybe he's a little slower. It's hard to say. And then you have some of those guys that it's kind of organized chaos, and those are the ones that seem to be the ones that get the most done. They may have a section like on a table set for a job they do so commonly or something, or tool set aside in a certain spot. So yeah, it's kind of more of a gray area, I think. But yeah, for me personally, there's always that one or two technicians that just thrive on the chaos to a point.
You're right. I worked with a few of them over the years, and it's almost kind of like a mad scientist a little bit. Like they're really good at what they do, and they're just kind of a tornado of everything, where they got it done, right? And that's a really good point. I have seen that over the years, where and even to your point about almost being too organized or too much of a perfectionist at times can really hurt your production, because you're so focused. And I had some of those folks as well. And actually one of a technician that had worked for me at one point was very much that way. And I had always wanted to kind of turn him into a trainer, because he was so meticulous with everything and he was very good at teaching others. And I think at times money did not play into his equation in his head, right? Like he was just, I need to fix this stuff. And people would come ask him questions, and then he'd be over in their stall working with them and showing them theory of operation, right? Like walking through how something works. And to me, some of those experienced technicians like that are invaluable, and it might not show up on the P&L or on your financials, but those types of people help young people out so much, that it often goes unnoticed, but it shouldn't, because those are really, really important people too.
Yeah, and lots of times we're doing it when no one else is paying attention. Going back to what I was telling you earlier about the truck that I was working with, that technician, I'm not putting my name or initials down anywhere. It was simply just, well, let's try this. This is something I do, part of my process. Let's see what it comes up with. And just sure enough, there was the first step to our problem. It was not the guaranteed solution, but it was the required first step. And we had our answer in about 5 minutes. It's, and it needs to come from enjoying doing what you do as well, and wanting to help others. I have the problem, and for me, myself, I move quick with what I do. There's so much to get done. It's hard for me to sit there and say, oh, okay, so this is what I'm doing now, and this is why I do this. This is kind of just me going through it, and I hope it's me going through it and saying, okay, I hope you picked up on that.
How how much of a factor and how important has failure been for you? If you've gone out and maybe gone through your diagnostic process, but had a misdiagnosis or didn't find the problem, or it took you a lot longer than you anticipated. Um, has that played a role in you being able to learn how to do your job better? Like, are you able to take those scenarios and turn them into positives where they're learning lessons in your craft, right? Like, is it adding to your repertoire, even though you failed, or in your eyes you failed, it's helped you move forward?
Oh, absolutely. If you, what is this saying? If you fail at something but you learn from it, it's not really failure.
Yeah.
That's huge. When you learn a mistake, when you make a mistake and you learn the hard way, that's the way that really drives home the most. Okay, don't do this again, whatever that was. Um, and some of it's trial and error. So
Yeah. And that's really hard for a young technician. The trial and error, right? I have referred to myself more than I like to in a normal episode here, but it does bring me back to those early days in a shop when you're trying to prove your worth, right? You're trying to prove that you're any good. And so you're just kind of running around like a chicken with your head cut off, and don't have the confidence yet, don't have the ability yet. But I think the importance of a mentor in a shop in that scenario is hugely important, to just say, hey, settle down, slow down, right? Because I think the tendency of a young technician is to go as hard as you can, go as fast as you can, try to prove people wrong. And it almost works against you rather than taking a breath and slowing down, especially with diagnostics. If you
yeah,
get in a rush with diagnostics, you're done.
yeah. And I was actually kind of thinking about this earlier before the podcast. For me in particular, coming up in this industry early on, it was it was the Wild West, and I imagine it was the same for you. I did not ever
Yeah.
have a uh, a mentor. I was never officially apprenticed anywhere. It was all learning on your own for the most part, working in a shop. Like I was mentioning earlier, I did a lot of my own training on my time. Um, so there we didn't have a lot of those resources, and when you come out of a tech school. It almost kind of it's almost like it doesn't make sense when you come out, because lots of times when you come out of a tech school, you say, "Oh, great! I just graduated from this program. I'm a technician now," and then you get hired at whatever dealership, independent repair facility, whatever, and they start you out doing a bunch of oil changes, and it just doesn't make sense. Like, wait, I just went through all this to learn how to do this, that, and to be your guy, and I'm just changing oil and tires and doing filters. And how did this happen? This doesn't make sense, and I think it weighs people down a little bit, and kind of kills some of the drive that they had. So there's a time period where it's tough to overcome until you really find your way as a tech.
Yeah, and we lose a lot of techs through that process, right? Where we go through that. I will say, and this is my looking back over my career and looking back over the careers of all the technicians that I've worked with over the course of my career. Those early days in a shop are so important. We're talking about theory of operation, and even doing oil changes and doing, tire rotations and changing tires. You start to learn things and pick things up. And I don't think we put enough value on that. And a lot of times it can get redundant and it can feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. But if you're doing them to the best of your ability, you're taking pride in those oil changes, you're taking pride in those, just an inspection, right? If you talk about process, having a good process for an inspection, you can learn a ton through the inspection process and getting visuals and learning how things work just by looking at it, and the variety of different vehicles that you can do that on. My message to a younger person there would be, just be patient. Like, yes, it will suck for a while, but
Yeah.
you can learn a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's where one of the new terms is, what do they call it? A career path.
Yeah.
That's become a real hot term in this industry. I think that's the direct result of recognizing that we lose, what is it, like 60 some percent technicians in the first 1 to 2
40,
years.
like 42-ish%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy. That's almost half. And
Yeah.
so if you can get them on a good path and actually, if you think about it, one of the most important jobs of being on like an express lane, starting there and doing the maintenance and inspecting vehicles, that's a very important job. That's safety. You may pick up on that a tie rod that's about to fall off, or a ball joint, or ball tires. That's a very, most people don't think that, but that's a pretty important job.
Yeah, especially when there's a family riding in that vehicle, right?
Absolutely.
I just think there's I think, when you look at the industry, it's common in a shop to say, it's just a brake job, just a brake job. And you're like, no,
No,
that's stopping a family, right? That is a truly a safety thing, as is torquing the wheels on torquing the wheels on a car or a truck, whatever it might be. Like, doing it to the spec is so important, because those specs are there for a reason, right? Like, they're there for a reason. And when we look at it and we take it for granted, which can be really easy to do, if you do 4 brake jobs in a day, you kind of get worn out by them, right? And there's some people that are just extremely good at that, but it is a really, really important job. At the end of the day, this is taking care of people and making sure that their vehicle is leaving in a safer position than when they brought it in.
absolutely. There's torque yield fasteners coming on brake components nowadays. Those are one-time use parts. Technically they need to be replaced once they come off. How many vehicles in a day probably get those? Do they get reused on? And no one thinks anything of it. And rotors is a common thing. How many times has somebody probably cut a rotor that was already too thin and got put back
Yeah.
on the car? And for most people driving their cars normal, it's probably not going to be an issue until something happens. There's that 1%, or that rotor may crack, and now and hopefully that's all that happens. A lot of I've seen that in my career. A lot of people don't measure rotors. Um, not where I'm at now, but like in the past, and like dealerships
Right.
typically.
I'm shocked at how many shops still cut rotors. Like, I remember going through tech school, and one of my instructors at one point just saying, well, this is kind of a dying thing. You're just going to replace all rotors because they're so cheap. And there's still a lot of shops that cut rotors. And I think the machines have gotten significantly more efficient and just better, but it's a little surprising to me, to be honest.
Well, I think it made a comeback during COVID because it was hard to get parts, metal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you had
Good
to do
point.
something. So they had to dust them off and put them back to use if it still worked. It was a way to get the job done. One thing I see that happens in my company a lot is we can't get some of these rotors on police cars. So as long as they're thick enough, you pretty much have no choice but to reuse them. I
Yeah.
mean, it's one thing if they're not thick. If they don't meet the standard minimum thickness, then we have to figure it out
You
from
can't do
there.
anything.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I think COVID really inspired a lot of that to come back.
That's an interesting observation. I think you're spot on there. We're getting close to the end of our time here. For that technician that struggles with diagnostics out there, and I want to finish with this, that struggles with diagnostics, maybe doesn't fully comprehend everything yet, what kind of advice would you give them for maybe just getting that process in place, taking that theory of operation a little bit more seriously? Any thoughts there that you would leave to even that experienced tech out there on how to build their process, how to just get better at it in general?
I would say the first thing, unquestionably, is get the training. There's lots of great companies that do all kinds of training that comes to you. I don't see why most shops wouldn't want to pay for it for you, especially now during the tech shortage. That builds great value for them. Training is definitely the most crucial. Then I would say, and again, for me, it comes when I was especially at dealerships and independents, don't assume all the responsibility on you. If they want something done in an unrealistic amount of time, you got to tell them, listen, this is a new problem. We haven't seen it before. The foreman hasn't seen it. We can't do this in the allotment of time that we have here. We have to make a change here. Or maybe something along those ends. But I think training is number one. You're going to make mistakes, and that's going to be the second best form of training, I think.
Yeah.
And to be patient, because you're going to build a knowledge base over time, and that's going to be invaluable as well.
We have a really good young technician at my dad's shop that goes out of his way after hours, whether it's in the shop or at home, but watching videos about how to use a scope and really being proactive around that. And there are a ton of resources, right? We recently brought on a partner here to WrenchWay, Garage Gurus, who does a phenomenal job with a lot of that type of training. Scanner Danner has gotten extremely popular, and we got this young technician. We got him a membership to Scanner Danner because it was just it's a fun way to learn, and I think it's almost what you do as good as anybody. And I notice this in all the great techs, is that this is your craft. This is what you are really, really good at, and you take it very seriously. And you've put in the time, you've put in the effort to get to where you're at today. That does not come overnight. I'm guessing you didn't start off that way, but over time you chip away at it, and man, you start to, once that light bulb clicks on, there's a lot of possibilities to what you can do in your career. And I gotta imagine it just gives you pride in being able to fix stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We should, if you have something you enjoy doing, especially career wise, you never work a day in your life. I know it's cheesy, but it's true to a point. I mean, my days fly by when I go to work. It's, I don't dread the clock. In fact, I look at it a lot and like, I don't have as much done as I want to, but
yeah,
it makes the day so much more tolerable. And it's nice to have the things like, like the Scanner Danner subscriptions today. We didn't have any of that when I was young. We really learned it the hard way.
Go ahead.
And I would say at the same time, don't be. There's a lot of real high end diagnosticians out there on the YouTubes and they're great at what they do. But I wouldn't. I think some people might see it and get overwhelmed by it too. Like, oh my God, I got to have all this and that. That's thousands of dollars there. I mean, it's not all an overnight process, just like we were just talking about just now. It's a culmination of years of experience and then spending money here and there. And I refer to them as diagnostic heroes. They're great, but it's like they're like the 1% that I try my damnedest to be a part of. I don't think I am, but hopefully we'll be there.
Well, I think most techs could, if you're finding yourself overwhelmed and looking at all those YouTube videos and the options for tooling out there, learn how to use a multimeter, like really good, right? Like really learn how to use a multimeter, because that can kind of be your bridge into everything else, and learning how to get better at things. It just feels like that you use that a lot, and maybe some people don't take that as seriously as they should. But I do think if you're at the entry of your diagnostic career, don't just say you know how to use a multimeter. Actually learn how to use a multimeter and use all the functions and figure out how to read it and how to set the scale correctly. I think even in that case, multimeters are a lot better today than they were 20, 30 years ago. So a lot of options on those too. So I think that's that to break it down in a simple way can help you learn that theory of operation on some things. I think there's a lot of value in a multimeter.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're in the golden age for tools. I mean, when I started, it was Sears. Well, Harbor Freight was around, but it was in its infancy. It was not a big thing. And then the trucks, that was it. I mean, of course, you could go and buy things online, but it wasn't like today.
No,
you can just go.
No.
You can take 15 minutes and find what you need. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's out there, you'll find it. Google will find it for you.
Well, Google will find it for you. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure of a conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk through your process and how you go about this, because I do think there's a lot of people that could learn from this, and a lot of people in our industry struggle on this very thing. So I appreciate you taking an hour out of your busy schedule to join us, and really, really had a lot of fun learning from you here. So I appreciate you joining us.
Oh yeah, it was a pleasure, and it's been an experience, to say the least. And a lot of it's come from a lot of failure. That's just part of it. Just don't do it twice. It was there's a great quote by Eddie Van Halen. He's one of my favorite musicians ever. He used to say his father used to tell him, when you're playing, if you make a mistake, do it again and smile so people think you did it on purpose. It doesn't much apply to our business, I don't think, but there's something to it for me.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on, Craig. Look forward to doing it again at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
That wraps up this week's episode of Beyond the Wrench. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode. As a reminder, don't forget to rate and follow Beyond the Wrench on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps us get Beyond the Wrench in front of other fantastic shop owners, managers, technicians, and dealers just like you, so we can continue to help improve, promote, and grow this amazing industry. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.